So it is about raising. I mean, is it about raising money for a cause, or is it about raising money for you?
Well, I don't separate myself from what I'm doing, so I can't really answer that question. I mean, for me, what, am I going to buy a yacht? No. You know, like, I'm not a luxury kind of guy. I'm not looking to live the high life. I'm 55 years old, for God's sake. What would I do with that?
When you talk, say, about domestic violence, in the end, if men are pushed too far by a too aggressive of feminism, there will be a backlash, and that there is, there's a sort of undercurrent of violence, be it verbal.
Oh, that's a warning, not a warning, not a commentary
it's a warning
on the
that
utility
kind
of
of suggests that there may be sort of fault in those who push progressivism too far. They will get a backlash. Some people, of course, see that as a bit of a permissive environment for bad behaviour.
Well, people tend to confuse describing the likelihood of something with supporting the fact that it exists. And I'm describing the likelihood of something, not supporting the fact that it exists. If you push too far on the left, you're going to get a backlash on the right. That's how things work. And this is just a derivation of that as far as I'm concerned.
How does that work in the context of domestic violence?
Oh, I don't think it's applicable in the context of domestic violence at all. I think those things are completely separate issues.
I mean, you were mentioning to me just as we were chatting.
And I was speaking only politically with regards to the backlash. That was a comment on political backlash. It had nothing to do with domestic violence. That's a whole different issue.
But violence often pops up in your work as something you think drives things. I think you've said in relations between men are regulated by a background threat of force, and in a sense that's why men have difficulty with women. Is it really so?
No, that's why men have difficulty with women who are completely out of control. But
who should control women?
Well, other women themselves, men, society, just like everyone is controlled. I mean, you're controlled by society, I'm controlled by society, and thank God for that. I mean,
funny. I mean, you described yourself as a liberal earlier, and I think a liberal doesn't think that a society controls women or men.
Well, let's say regulates. I'm a psychologist as well.
But what is an out-of-control woman? What is this creature? How do we know when we met one?
Well, I'm sure that you've met women in your life that acted towards you in a bullying and detestable manner. It's very difficult for women to cope with that because they don't have any real recourse. And female bullying can be unbelievably vicious. And usually it takes the shape of reputation destruction, innuendo, and gossip. It's well documented. It's very difficult to defend. Men do it too, but men no. But
disproportionately women, in your view, or not? Sorry.
Yes, disproportionately women. That's what the data indicate. I mean,
where is the data on innuendo and gossip?
Well, it's among antisocial behavior among adolescents. It's a well-documented field. So, because people look at aggressive and antisocial behavior in women and in men. And in women, it tends to take the expression of innuendo, gossip, and reputation destruction. And in men, it tends to take the form of outright physical aggression. There's a whole literature on that. It's not a surprise to anyone. This has been known for 30 years. I mean, the rates of antisocial...
I think the idea of the female gossip probably predates 30 years.
Well, it does.
By a long time, but that doesn't make it gospel,
but
really,
people
does it?
No, it doesn't. But people have looked at how women express... Look, women have to express aggression somehow unless you're willing to say that they're not aggressive. They tend not to do it physically, not to the degree men do, so they use other channels. And what other channels are there other than physical aggression if you're going to be aggressive? Well, you go after people verbally. You go after them with innuendo and gossip and reputation destruction. And that's how it works.
And just to be clear, that you think that's predominantly a female modus operandi?
It isn't that I think that.
Well,
it's that the clinical literature indicates that. It isn't that I think it.
Well, I'm not interviewing the clinical literature. I'm interviewing you. What do you think?
Well, I'm a psychologist and a scientist, and I tend to base my opinions on what I've read in the broad, relevant clinical literature. I'm not making this stuff up. I studied antisocial behavior for like 15 years. I'm actually quite an expert on it. And so we know that men are more likely to... Look at it this way. All right. Women are much more likely to try to commit suicide. And men are much more likely to kill themselves. And the reason for that is that men use lethal force and women don't. Now that's a big difference. Okay, so then you say, well, women manifest aggression towards themselves and to others, but they don't use lethal force. They don't use physical force the same way men do. So they have to do it some other way.
Why do they have to do something some other way?
Because people are aggressive.
You rightly picked up on the disruptive effect of social media, but also the technological shifts in media and mass media consumption. my argument was that this might be, leading to a polarisation, that people like you who are immensely successful within this milieu, but there is that, that point that you become part of the problem, that you've put your finger on yourself. You want people to get along together. You want men and women to sort of trade off. We don't agree entirely where these trade-offs are, but, we're here and arguing about it. And yet, at the same time, you succeed most when you say something very provocative that goes viral. You think you're sort of trapped in a paradox.
I don't think that's when I succeed most. So, for example, one of the incidents that propelled me to success, let's say, in terms of public recognition in the UK was my interview with Cathy Newman. And the reason that propelled me to success wasn't because I said something provocative, but because I refused under substantial duress to say anything provocative. And so part of the reason that I've become popular to the degree that I have been is that I'm actually very good at keeping my temper under situations where there's substantial reason not to, let's say. And I would also say that the good that I've done with regards to my online lectures far outweighs whatever harm might be done by the fact that people are cutting them and making provocative titles out of them and construing this as some sort of fundamental political war.
But it's not just other people, is it? If you look at something like the model that you partly use to promote your work is the crowdfunding site. So the more you incite a reaction, the more loyal your Patreon site, the more loyal the subscribers become, the more money is raised for causes that you want to promote.
No, that isn't how it works. The reason that, first of all, I give away all my content online for free. So the people who subscribe to Patreon are subscribing to nothing. They're supporting me, and they're not supporting me because of my political stance primarily. They're supporting me because they've watched my videos and they've been helped by them as individuals, and they're hoping that can happen to a lot of other people.
But if you want to give, excuse me.
Yeah.
If you see it as self-help and you want to give it away for nothing, then why bring money into the equation at all? And why have this sort of high-octane sort of crowdsourcing? Does rely on people coming to you wanting to pledge their money. Why put money into it at all? Isn't this an area where the market might be better left out?
I am an evil capitalist after all, and I don't really make any apologies for that.
Why do you want to monetize?
Well, because I can do useful things with money, and partly because I'm curious, partly because I need to live, partly because my job was at risk for a long while and that's not going to happen to me again, partly because I had to give up my clinical practice because of other considerations, partly because I have a family, partly because I want to build an online university.
Is it about raising money for a cause, or is it about raising money for you?
Well, I don't separate myself from what I'm doing, so I can't really answer that question. I mean, for me, what, am I going to buy a yacht? No. I'm not a luxury kind of guy. I'm not looking to live the high life. I'm 55 years old, for God's sake. What would I do with that? I have lots of things that I would do with some money. One of the things I want to do is build an online university, but it's not the only thing I want to do. And so I would put the money to good use, I suspect, or at least to reasonable use. And the reason that people are providing me with this money, which they don't have to do, is because they hope that I'll continue to do what I'm doing. And that is exactly the reason they're providing it with me. And my leftist critics have been saying for consistently, it's actually quite comical. Well, look at all the money that Dr. Peterson is generating with his Patreon account. It's like, well, I'm not selling anything. All the stuff I do online is free. It's not even advertising supported. So if people want to support me on Patreon because they think that what I'm doing is helpful, then more power to them as far as I'm concerned.
Do you feel that your kind of hearing works better in one direction than the other?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this week, for example, I was accused by a Jewish newspaper of harboring sympathies, which was rather miserable. But at the same time, an alt-right article came out today telling me that I was a stooge and a shill for the Jews. So, they figure I'm pretty much in the middle if I can attract that sort of criticism on both sides. And with regards to the right-wing issue, the right wing does not pose a threat to the integrity of universities in North America and Europe, but the left wing certainly does, and that's well documented, and not by me. There are no conservatives in universities, in the social sciences and the humanities. They don't exist, and that's not a good thing. And the radical left in universities absolutely exists and has utterly threatened the integrity of those institutions. And so to the degree that I've concentrated on the radical left, it's because the radical left has usurped the universities.
Masculinity per se. You must know that.
I read the American Psychological Association guidelines for the treatment of boys and men, and I know perfectly well that this is no straw man. The first thing I would say is that I'm not anti-feminist per se. I mean, I think the idea that the world would benefit from the movement of talent from both sexes into the workplace as rapidly as possible is something that anyone with any sense should share, given the rather the rarity of talent and the necessity for utilizing it. I do stand by my original statement, though, that there's a brand of more radical feminism that insists that our culture is best characterized as an oppressive patriarchy, and I think that, first of all, that's an appalling sociological doctrine, and I think it has very negative psychological effects. And they won't be limited to men, because if it's true that there's something toxic, let's say, about masculinity per se, what that will inevitably mean is that as women adopt more masculine roles, traditionally, what is that toxicity somehow going to go away?
But that's a straw man, because no one says there's anything toxic about masculinity per se.
What do you mean no one says that?
People
The
use-
term exists.
No,
How is that a straw man? Well, where did the term come
It's a
from?
phrase that's used about forms of masculinity that are harmful to men and women. It's not about masculinity per se. You must know that.
I
to
read the
argue
American
about
Psychological Association guidelines for the treatment of boys and men, and I know perfectly well that this is no straw man. And it's not only devoted towards what you might describe as the more aggressive ends of masculine behavior. It's aimed at masculinity in a much broader range of. There's a much broader range of accusations that are under the surface than that. And so I don't see in what way at all that it's a straw man.
I'm just going to pause that argument
agree
for
to
a second
disagree, I
and
think,
go
on that.
to...
That isn't what I said. Like, you're pushing it past what I said by a substantial margin. I'm a sexual conservative. I'm not in the camp of let's grab each other under the mistletoe at the Christmas party, because what the hell? Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good if it did. That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together
I don't know.
without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together?
More than 40.
To get a sense. More than 40?
We're new at this.
We're new at this.
Absolutely. We're completely new at it. It's only been a couple of generations. That's part of the problem, right? Is that we don't know what the rules are. Like, what? Here's a rule. How about no makeup in the workplace?
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason. How about high heels? What are they for?
What about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do. They tilt your pelvis forward so your hips stick out. That's what they do. And they tighten up your calf muscles. They're a sexual display. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing. And that is what they're doing.
So what is the relevance then to like sexual harassment in the workplace then if you can't make...
Well, the Maoists put everybody in uniforms to stop that sort of thing from happening. Men wear uniforms. That's the way they wear suits.
I guess I'm not seeing the sort of coherence of the thought that you're putting together then, because...
What are the rules that govern sexual interactions between men and women in the workplace?
Yes.
The answer is, we don't know. Right. So I'm throwing out some questions. How about makeup? Oh, that's okay. Is it? Why? Why is it okay?
Well, I would think that there's certain ownership over one's body that they can take without...
How about negligees?
Well, look, if you
That's
had
going too far.
If you had a workplace with negligees, I think that there would be some sort of standard idea that maybe that would be a sexualized...
Okay, so there's some line between lipstick and negligees that we don't want to cross. Okay, fair enough. Where exactly is the line?
I don't think that anyone would say that wearing makeup to the office is in some ways like sexually deviant or something like that, or that it's inviting a sort of atmosphere of sexuality within the workplace.
I would say that.
You
the
would
second
say
part, sure. It's exactly what it's doing.
Okay,
Why
so
else would you wear lipstick?
Complete the thought for me then, because that's the part that I'd like for you to do. Like, complete the thought. A woman...
I'm not saying that women shouldn't do it. And I'm also not saying that it should be banned. But I'm saying that you're absolutely naive if you don't think that that has anything to do with sexuality.
Or
Obviously
sexual
it does.
harassment? Does it have something to do with sexual harassment in the workplace?
I don't know.
Do you feel that, let's just, yes or no question, do you feel like women wearing makeup in the workplace contributes to sexual harassment in the workplace?
Sure, it contributes.
And so what should be done about that? You as a clinician who believes that there should be prescriptive ideas that don't mandate behavior, but that will guide behavior.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace, that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah, I do think that. I don't see how you could not think that. It's like makeup is sexual display. That's what it's for. You say, well, I want to look more attractive. It's like, what do you mean by attractive exactly?
So then what is a better outcome for you then? A workplace with no sexual harassment, where women wear uniforms and don't wear makeup, much like the Maoists, like you were saying, or a sort of freer workplace in which sexual harassment is an inevitability because women wear high heels and makeup?
Well, I don't say that sexual harassment is an inevitability because women wear high heels and makeup. I didn't say that.
Or that it is more likely?
I said that it contributes to the sexualization of the workplace.
What's the difference between more likely and that?
Okay, more likely. I'll go with that.
Yeah, more likely, right?
Sure, okay.
Okay, so which one do you prefer?
Oh, I prefer the one where people had the freedom.
And so within that, so we've gotten to that point, that people should have freedom to wear makeup, right? But that will inevitably lead to, not inevitably, that it is more likely that sexual harassment happens in the workplace.
That isn't what I said. Like you're pushing it past what I said by a substantial margin.
Sure,
I said
but,
that we
like,
don't
this is one of the
understand the
things where,
rules
like,
that govern the interactions between men and women in the workplace, right? We don't understand the rules. And so I was pushing a limit case. That's what I was doing. I wasn't saying women shouldn't wear makeup.
No, I was
saying
never
we
saying
could
that
have
you
a
said
question
that either,
about,
though.
there should be a question raised about that. And there is often. I mean, companies have dress codes, let's say, you know, and they have a reason for that. But the fact that we got tangled up in this conversation is an indication of exactly how difficult it is to have a reasonable conversation about exactly what rules should govern the interactions between men and women in the workplace.
I would object to that a little bit because I think the reason why this conversation has been difficult is because, like, there are certain things where you'll just punt and you'll say, I'm not saying that, and you'll try and be very hyper-specific. And now, look, there are examples of that where I feel like you were right. Like, I feel like the Kathy Newman article, or the Kathy Newman interview, I felt like a lot of that she put words in your mouth.
You're just saying that's the way it is. So
you
you're
can
saying
rely on.
women have some sort of duty.
So
You're
if you
saying
want
women
domination-
want to dominate. You're saying you've done your research.
I don't feel like I'm doing that. In fact, I've been extremely careful not to.
I'm definitely not accusing you of that.
Okay, so
I'm just saying that these sorts of conversations are difficult, not that you're making it unduly difficult, because I don't think you are.
How do we not then take the next step and say that if we want to get rid of sexual harassment in the workplace, that your belief is that women should not wear high heels or makeup in the workplace?
Oh, because there's other potential solutions. People could, you could allow for a certain amount of sexual tension and not act on it in a reprehensible manner. One of the things that's enjoyable about the interactions between men and women, even if you're married, is an element of flirtatiousness that can underscore the interaction. Okay, you don't want to get rid of that. It's too tyrannical to get rid of that. But you're playing with fire. You have to know that you're playing with fire. And so there's going to be some sexual provocativeness in the workplace, let's say, both ways. But you're playing with fire. And you need to know what the rules are. We don't know what the rules are.
Okay, how about what if I said it is okay to flirt with your coworker from time to time, but, you know, don't grab them in the privates?
Well, that seems, you know, I think we could agree that that might be a reasonable start, right? But then, of course, you still have the problem of exactly what constitutes acceptable flirting.
Do you feel like the majority of people then who are sort of in this Me Too movement right now who have been speaking out,
Yeah.
I mean, do you really think all of them are saying that you can't flirt at all? You know, or do you think most of them are saying, you just don't grab me in the privates? Because I just, as somebody who also has read about this, who's studied it quite a bit, who has followed it very intensely, it really does seem like the message is like, hey, like, you know, don't pull your robe off, don't grab me in the boobs.
No, I think it's worse than that.
You do?
Yeah, well, look at what happened with NBC. Now you're supposed to report your coworkers if you suspect them of romantic entanglements. You said, like, is it only about not being grabbed? It's like, no, it's not only about that.
If it was only about not being grabbed, would you be okay with it?
Well, I'm not in favor of people being involuntarily grabbed. I'm not in favor of sexual harassment or sexual assault, and not in the least. I already told you what I think. I'm a sexual conservative.
Sure.
I don't think people should have sex on the first date. I think they should be very careful with sex, right? So I'm not in the camp of let's grab each other under the mistletoe at the Christmas party, because what the hell? I'm not in that camp. I'm in the be bloody careful camp, and don't step out of line. And don't, like, have designs on your secretary when you hire her. I think that's all appalling.
You have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be?
First of all, thank you very much for being here and helping us to wake up. I really appreciate it. So my question is, as a redeemed progressive, what is the key to empowering men in the Me Too age while maintaining healthy boundaries and strong behavioural expectations?
We've had relatively reliable birth control since 1960. Okay, that's not very long. And we underestimate the unbelievable technological triumph of birth control. It's the hydrogen bomb, it's the transistor, like it's a major league transformation in human interaction. Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay, we don't know exactly what to do about that. Okay, so the first idea in the 60s was, hell, let's party. And you know, you could see why. It's like, what the rules for not engaging in promiscuous sexual intercourse seemed to have vanished. So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say. That's not so good for kids. AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later, and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through, because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. That was the rule. Now that isn't the rule. Okay, so what's the rule? Well, we're not having a conversation about the rule. We're waiting till someone does something that seems like it might be untoward and then mobbing them and trying to extract the rule out that way. And it's not a very effective way of doing it. You know, you want to decrease campus rape? That's easy. Get rid of alcohol. No one has that conversation. It's like, I did my PhD work on alcohol. 50% of the people who are murdered are drunk, and 50% of the people who kill them are drunk. And almost all the date rape situations are consequences of excess intoxication. But yet there's a party culture on campuses, and anything goes. And you also have this strange thing, especially on the radical left, which is unbelievably paradoxical, where absolutely every form of sexual expression imaginable is 100% permissible because sex is fine, but it's so dangerous that while you're dancing with someone at a Princeton mixer, you have to ask them 2 or 3 times if it's okay for you to continue. And that's actually the case, by the way. I'm not making that up. It's like, well, both of those things can't be true. Now, what's happening, I think, on the Me Too end of things and the affirmative consent end of things is the old sexual taboos are reasserting themselves. The idea that we can extract sex out from emotional intimacy, and especially emotional intimacy, I would say, psychological intimacy, maybe even from long-term relationship, I don't believe it's a tenable idea. I don't think we can do it. And a lot of what we're seeing is the backlash against that. It's like, well, I feel used. You know, because one of the things that's happening on the really radical end of the anti-sexual abuse movement is the idea that, well, if you have intercourse with someone and then you regret it the next day, that's evidence that it wasn't consensual. Well, it is, in a sense, evidence that it wasn't consensual, because it's evidence that you didn't bloody well think it through, right? It was good for last night, but it's not good for today. It's not very wise. The question is, well, what constitutes consent? And we need to have a very serious conversation about that. Like, under what circumstances is it acceptable to give consent? But we're not mature enough to have that conversation. We want it both ways. We want to be able to do whatever we want, with whoever we want, whenever we want, with no consequences, and we want there never to be any trouble about consent. It's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. I don't think that sex works very well outside of committed relationships. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. There's a strong proclivity across cultures for the enforcement, social enforcement of long-term monogamy. And there's reasons for that. And I think you deviate from that at your peril. So now, if you want to deviate from that, there's all sorts of reasons to do it. And I can understand why people are interested in adventure and all of that. But, you know, my sense also as a clinician is, you know, you only really get to try out about 5 people in your life. You have to make a decision pretty damn quick. You know, like between 20 and 30, there's a lot of things to get straight, and long-term mate is usually one of them. And most of the time, people should be more careful with their sexual behavior when they're young, especially when they're drunk, than they are. And I just think it's so interesting that all of the taboo reconstruction is coming from the radical left. It's not what you'd expect at all. You'd think it'd be the damn right-wing Christians complaining about, you know, sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's the radical lefties. You know, you have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be? You know, you're supposed to be able to do a little bit of nonverbal reading, right? I mean, that's part of romance. You don't see it. You ever see a movie where the 2 people who are dating exchange consent notes? Like, that doesn't happen. So it's an unrealistic solution. But I think the real solution is that despite the fact that we have reliable birth control, we're going to have to relearn what the acceptable rules of propriety are with regards to sexual relationships. One of the things I often tell my young clients is, don't do anything physically with anyone that you wouldn't talk to them about. Because if you're too damn embarrassed to talk about it, well, maybe it's a little premature in the relationship to actually do it. And then there's harm in it. You know, there's emotional harm in it on both parties. There's the cheapening of both parties. So it's going to take us a long time to sort this out. But hopefully we can do it in a serious manner, and it won't be merely a matter of mobbing those who seem to have made an error.